Trippy on Twitter. Follow me. I really like having followers. I'm a media professional. I set up the marketing department of Yashraj Films a good 10 years ago. I was the head of marketing for 6 years. Then I was head of MySpace India for 2 years. And my first love has always been teaching. My first love has always been teaching. So over the last, over the last 7 or 8 years, I've been teaching in MBA schools across India. And over the last 2 years, I've been taking it very, very seriously and doing credit courses in the IIMs, in MICA, in ISB, FMS, Symbiosis. Whenever anybody wants me to come, I land up. And the one thing I noticed a lot is the amount of frustration that students have in their MBA. They pay, it's true, they pay like 7, 8, 10 lakh rupees for their MBA. They know what the outside world is expecting from them, and they go into an MBA course and they realize that they're being taught fuck all, which is going to actually help them in the world outside, right? Unfortunately, our education system is so built that for most of our lives in India, we are taught not to think. We are told that our opinions do not matter. And then suddenly you walk into an MBA class, and in the convocation you have to learn to unlearn and then relearn and analyze a case and do this and do that. And it's not the student's fault that they don't know how to do it, because just like everything else, it is a skill. And a skill can only be sort of developed if you practice on it. So if you haven't practiced this skill throughout your entire education, you can't walk into an MBA and suddenly think that I can work, right? So based on that frustration which I've been sensing across business schools, I started a new course called Tools for Turbulence, which I do with the PGP1s in MBA schools. It's a very, very popular course there. It's between 15 and 30 hours, which I'm going to try to condense into 20 minutes here. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Right, we're going to start with a small joke. Sardarji jumps off a plane with this other guy, right? So they jump down, they're 20,000 feet. They're falling. At 10,000 feet, the guy turns around and says, do you want to open your parachute? Sardarji says, no, what time hai? Come down to 5,000 feet, let's open the parachute. No, there's lots of time. Come down to 1,000 feet, let's open the damn parachutes. No, there's lots of time. Come to 100 feet, open the parachute. No, there's lots of time. They're 10 feet above the ground. He's like, can we open the fucking parachute? And Sardarji goes, why? We can just walk down from here. Right? What was wrong with the Sardarji's logic? Anyone? Nikhil, what do you think was wrong with his logic? Yeah. So, why did he think he was not going to die?
He's touching the last 10 feet and not the whole 20,000 feet.
Perhaps, actually the other way around. His assumption is that he's part of a linear system. That whatever's been happening in the past is going to continue happening in the future. And realize that when you're in most jobs and in most corporates, whether you're doing research or marketing, this linear system is something which is going to be thrown at you over and over again. People are going to look at previous research to decide what the future is. People are going to look at what happened in the past and assume that it's the past multiplied by 2. Right? That's pretty much, we have a 6% growth, we want a sort of straight line in growth. Right? That's a linear system. Is that always the case? No, it's very often the case. Alright, let's be clear that when times are good, when the world is peaceful, the world is linear. Right? That time you can fuck around a little bit here or there, it doesn't really matter. Right? But there are times when the past does not define the future, and I've just mentioned in the space of media, 3 times, or in the space of economics actually, 3 times when there was something which was so genre breaking, I guess, that you couldn't define what was going to happen moving forward based on what was happening before it. First in the 1600s, the invention of the printing press. Knowledge is power, and until the printing press was created, all power and all knowledge rested with churches. So you had a religious monarchy. That was the system of government. Once the printing press started, literacy increased. Not literacy increased, therefore printing press started. It was the other way around. The causality was opposite. The Enlightenment happened. Voltaire, Rousseau, all of their sort of thoughts on freedom, democracy started getting sort of spread to a large public. The power was disseminated. Religious monarchies fell, the nation state started, the concept of democracy began because of the printing press. Then in the late 1800s, there was the Industrial Revolution, or the start of the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution happened, people used to still make their goods and products and do stuff, right? It's not as if the world was like nanga and useless before the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution said this is a different way of doing things, let us do it this way. It was economical, and it led to what we call capitalism as we now understand it, right? It also led to something called patent law. Patent law came because somebody was trying to own stuff, whereas before there was no reason for patent law, because everything was vocational. And now we're on the cusp of a new revolution, which everybody talks about all the time, the information revolution. What are the unintended consequences which we can't foresee? We don't know yet. It's just begun. YouTube didn't exist 5 years ago. When I was in my MBA in 2002, Wikipedia didn't exist. You understand the short frame of time? Can you imagine life without YouTube? Today you can't. 5 years ago it didn't exist. What happens at these points is what you call a phase change. Now, okay, again, I really like science, I really like mathematics, and I seem to find that everything translates into science for me. So even if I'm talking about media or I'm talking about culture, I'll come back to the maths of it. Everybody knows what a phase change is from like class 9 physics. You're boiling water, it boils in a linear system, then suddenly it turns into steam, and at that boundary condition you have something called turbulence, right? When you're shifting from one state to another, the boundary space that you're in is a turbulent space. There the linear rules no longer apply. Yeah? The mathematics of turbulence, everybody thinks turbulence is chaotic and random. It isn't. It is complex. And complexity theory has a lot to explain as to what happens in turbulence. So you can use those things. So why am I talking to you about all this jazz? Why does it matter? Because the turbulence caused by the information revolution is going to last the next 30 to 40 years until it settles the fuck down. That is your entire working lives. We are of the great generation that is going to live through these turbulent times. We may not even be working when everybody settles down and remembers that this is how life always was. When we get into a new linear system, we have to take care of this turbulent time. And unfortunately, our education system has been built for a linear industrial system. Why is engineering and mathematics on top of the education food chain? Simply because in the 1800s, the British realized that they needed workers for their factories, and they needed people who understood basic maths, basic logic, basic engineering. And that was transported with the sort of British colonial movement all over India, or all over the world. And that's why we've got this predominantly sort of science heavy. Why isn't music or art or drama on the top of our education food chain? Why are the sciences there? Because the education system is churning out workers for the Industrial Revolution. Yes?
Yeah, Ken Robinson talked about
He talked about this as well, absolutely.
Same thing, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something which is known for quite some time now. So, unfortunately, what I'm trying to get to is that your education is not training you for the world you're going to be facing. The world you're going to be facing requires you guys to have a brand new toolkit, and we're going to try to see what those tools are. Please come sit. Firstly, who's going to be using these tools? You guys, right? And people younger than you. Mark Prensky is a really nice researcher from MIT. He's talked about a concept called digital natives. Anybody's heard the phrase digital natives? Show hands. 1, 2, alright. By age 21, it's estimated that a person who's going to be 21 in 5 years from now has watched this much time doing non-reading stuff and this much time reading. The way we are consuming information is changing in a very, very fundamental way. Yeah? And again, take that experience and jump it into your classroom. In your classroom, the way you're supposed to sort of regurgitate information is text. But in your life, when you're studying, when you're not in college and you're just doing your research, text is the last thing you look at. You want audio-visual stuff, yeah? So Prensky talks about this new generation of people who were born within the digital revolution, yeah? It's like being born after television was invented. If you're born after television was invented, it doesn't seem like technology to you. But you ask your parents about the computer, and for them it's still this newfangled thing. You ask my 10-year-old cousin about the computer, and it's absolutely normal way of life. It's not technology for him, it's a way of life. So he divides the world into digital natives, people who are kind of fluent in technology, comfortable with using technology, and digital immigrants. And Prensky's paper talks about how that leads to a disconnect between teachers and their students. So I think you recognize yourselves here, and I think you recognize your dad and mom and your grandparents over here, in terms of how you process information and what you expect from people, right? For example, you much prefer multimedia over text. Multitasking. Look at your computer and the number of tabs you have open. How many times have your parents said कि एक चीज खत्म करो फिर दूसरी चीज शुरू करो? Right? How many times? All of us have heard it. But that's just not how we work. That's not how we work. We work much better. We've got 20 tabs open and we're doing 3 minutes of this, 5 minutes of this, 2 seconds of time pass, 5 minutes of bathroom break. That's how we like to work, right? We want immediate rewards. And again, look, think of yourselves in the classroom. You will take God's own peaceful time to like hand in your reports, but once you've handed in your projects, within 50 minutes, ma'am marks, ma'am marks, ma'am marks. You can't wait to get your marks back. There should be a way to reward you for doing something much more immediately than you get right now, yeah? And you guys learn not when you're sitting down to study. As a matter of fact, the only time you guys don't learn is when you're sitting in a classroom or supposed to be studying, right? Otherwise, the amount of time you guys spend on Google, we spend on Wikipedia, we spend fucking around, that's all learning which is relevant to us, yeah? This is what digital natives like. These are the people that need to know these tools. Digital natives want to be creative. They want to have lots of multimedia stuff. They want to be taught things in short segments. How many of you guys can sit through a 1.5 hour class? When I teach, I don't take 1.5 hour classes anymore. I teach for 10 minutes and I completely change the topic and take a 2-minute break and spend 10 minutes talking about something completely different. Simply because nobody's going to listen to me otherwise. So, this is my dad, this is me, and this is my nephew, Raghav, right? For my dad, he's like, what is the internet? Yeah. For me, I'm like, the internet is this interesting tool. Raghav cannot comprehend the concept that he may possibly be disconnected at some point of his life. He can't understand, what do you mean I'm disconnected? I mean, just it's like us not thinking that we could possibly not have a television. It's the same thought for him, yeah? Career, my father has spent 45-50 years in the same job. Yeah, a lot of our parents have done that. Started at a company, spent 30 years in that company, slowly building up. A lot of our generation or my generation switches jobs very often. And as we move further, what we're realizing is that people are changing, are reinventing themselves. From 20 to 30, you might be a corporate guy. From 30 to 40, you might decide you're becoming a doctor. From 40 to 50, you might decide I'll become a teacher. It's not something to laugh at. It's something to realize that people are now working more for self-actualization and less for money. Money is coming. Money is coming. I don't think we are that scared about money anymore. So those are the people we're talking to, and these are the tools we need to equip them with. The first is why. Understand the underlying assumptions of anything you guys are fed. I had a great teacher called Srini in IIM Lucknow when I used to study, and he used to rape you just by saying that one word. You used to say a sentence, but why? But why? Girls used to cry, man. He was that hardcore. He used to tremble. He was hardcore. Just by asking one word, why? Because at some point you realize that your knowledge is not deep enough. At some point you're breaking it down. For example, why do women's shirts button on the left? Have you ladies noticed that? That it's kind of hard to put on your buttons because they're kind of on the wrong side. Why does that happen? Does anybody know why they're on the left?
Because in olden times they used to have their maids putting them.
Absolutely. Until very recently, women did not dress themselves. They wore dress. Because they were rich and whatever. But why? Because they married rich husbands. Why was he rich? I don't know.
Why wasn't he dressing her?
He probably did, but he probably like kind of loses weight.
Undressed her.
And if you're being dressed by someone, then that person is right-handed. It makes sense for the button to be on. I'm sorry to make this kind of a shape, but it makes sense for the button to be on this side, right? And all these fashion designers, now nobody gets dressed by a maid. But even now, that same assumption that women's buttons are supposed to be on one side, their belt buckles are supposed to be on the opposite side.
Now I think it's when they're convenient to undress it.
Assumptions. They're the mother of all fuck-ups. In 1944, Simon Kuznets, a very, very famous economist, came up with a concept called gross domestic product, GDP. All of you guys know about it, right? Yeah? Every country, every government in the world measures their success how? By their GDP. However, after around 1951, Kuznets spent 40 years until he died in 1990 something. He spent 40 years begging governments, please stop using GDP. I made a mistake. गलती कर दी मैंने कुछ assumptions किए थे इसमें जो गलत assumptions थे. लेकिन nobody listened. What is the basic? Yeah. Already? Fuck, I've gotten nowhere. The basic assumption in this was that in GDP is that nothing has value until it is transformed into something which is for human use. So gold that exists in the ground is essentially free, right? Because we're not paying rent to the soil, right? I mean, again, if any of you guys understand economics, you understand what this means. So what that implies is that because it's a free resource, supply and demand requires you to strip mine to maximize profitability. Because you're putting no inherent costs in the raw material in the ground. That is why you strip mine. Because of that basic assumption. कि अगर हमने नहीं use किया तो मुफ्त कर. Right? That's just a man who's made an assumption, and that's why we've reached the space we've reached. So yeah, assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups, and if you can find the assumption, you can find where the problem begins. That's the first tool. The second tool is look for the underlying science. In other words, ask how. Right? The example I want to give here is how do certain ideas survive? Why are all of us wearing blue jeans? Has anybody actually thought why blue jeans have become like the norm? Or why Royson, me, and so many people are wearing brown cargo shorts with a t-shirt which says something? Why do we dress so similarly? How come certain ideas of dress or any other idea survives? And why certain ideas don't, yeah? And then I want to talk to you about the death of a hat. Has anybody heard of memetics?
Yes.
Yes, what is memetics? Show hands. Yes, ma'am. A culturally repeating pattern. Memetics is the study of culturally repeating pattern. Yeah. Anybody know what Darwinism is? Obviously. Yeah. Universal Darwinism says that the same sort of competition doesn't exist only for genes, it can exist for anything that replicates. Yeah. So a meme is a mind virus. We know this word because we hear a lot about internet memes. But if you read Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene, which was published in 1976, you get more idea of it. It's the cultural equivalent of a gene. Just like a gene transmits genetic information, a meme transmits cultural information. Culture is everything we say, do, think, all that stuff is our culture, yeah? A meme is like a parasite. A meme or an idea, if you want to call it an idea, it stays in my head, then it is transmitted through some vector or something, and it goes into your head. For example, if I sing a song, if I sing right? Somebody or the other is going to get that meme stuck in their head, and 3 minutes later they find themselves humming the song and saying, why? Why do I have a song stuck in my head, right? That's a meme. You connect memes together who all are giving the same information and you get a memeplex. For example, if I say angry young man to you, not only do you think of Amitabh Bachchan, but you think of, I know, 5 minutes, huh? Really? Alright, so, okay, I'm going to finish this one and then I'll go to the conclusion. So, I'll take 6 minutes, sorry. So, the mystery about hats. Let's assume we all understood memes. The mystery about hats is that they've existed since 300 BC. And from the 1700s to the 1950s, you could not leave your house without your hat. Right? I'm assuming the Western world, actually. I'm assuming the Western culture here. So, just like I talked about what I was talking about before, this is also Western culture. The education I was talking about before, this is also assuming Western culture, yeah? Assuming England or whatever. So for Western culture, for 250 years, you could not leave your house. Like leaving your house without a hat was like leaving your house without your trousers. Right? You didn't do it. Now Google images, just write 1950s and Google images, and type 1960s and Google images. And something for 250 years which was so de rigueur, within 10 years, the entire concept of wearing a hat died. Why are none of us wearing hats? when for 250 years we could not be seen in the world like this. So the idea of wearing a hat must have had some advantage to the gene. That's why it survived. If it was disadvantageous to the gene, we would have not sort of let it replicate. So the hat wearing idea is something that survived, but that reason for its survival died as the environment changed, and we can prove that. We wore hats to protect our skulls initially, yeah? If anything falls on our head, we die, our genes can't replicate, so we wear this hat to save ourselves from dying. We still do that, we wear helmets, yeah? The reason ornamental hats started getting worn was because of fleas. Judges in the English courts used to wear those white wigs because they used to handle lower class people, and they were scared that the fleas would jump from one person to the other, and fleas were equivalent to plague for the longest time, so it was something that they were scared of. So if you wore a hat, it was less likely that you would catch the plague, i.e. it was more likely that you were healthier, i.e. you were kind of sexier, I kind of want to have sex with you, yeah? Because there's a higher chance of my children surviving if you're wearing a hat. It's true, this is actually why it happened. And pretty soon we forgot why we were doing that, and we just started seeing this hat as a symbol of sexuality.
It's like a condom then, no?
Well, the opposite, I would say. The bigger the hat, the more babies you have. So you started getting these ornamental hats, yeah? And if you didn't have a hat, no one's gonna fuck you, right? Because we scared you. What changed though? Why did hat wearing suddenly die? Hat was a accessory, as it's called, you know, an accessory to sex. Certain accessories to sex changed. In the mid-1900s, the bra, the miniskirt, and the bikini started coming into play. So the hat became less sexy because other parts of the body were starting to be seen as sexy. Yeah? At the same time, in England, which was the center of that culture, due to the World War II, that was the one time you were now allowed to leave your house without a hat. Because if the bomb sirens went off, you could run out of your house. If you didn't wear your hat, you were forgiven.
Repeat.
Yeah.
We'll have to...
70 seconds. 70 seconds. I'm going to finish this and then go to the conclusion.
Cool.
Yeah. At the same time, because of the war, women were working. They couldn't wear sort of big hats. They let go of the hats. Slowly, the reason why the hat existed died, and the wearing of hats died. Of course, the hats made a comeback recently. What does this say? If you see a guy with his hat backwards, what do you think about that person?
Douchebag.
Douchebag? Man, what do you think? Cool. You have to realize that once upon a time, a hat made you sexy because it made you look respectful. Now, a hat makes you look disrespectful and therefore makes you look sexy. So what women are expecting from us have changed. Tool number 3 is using analogies, which I will not do now, obviously. And I'm moving. I tried. This is something which I want to talk about really fast. This sort of dichotomy between being creative and being sort of business person. Being creative is seen as an insult. If you're creative, that means you don't understand business. These are all sentences which I've heard, which I don't really like. And creativity is not rocket science. And that's what I wanted to get to you with these tools. If you actually start using different tools to approach a problem, you're going to come out with different answers. Right? There's a saying that if all you have is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. So if you have a different set of tools, the whole world is not going to look like a nail. And then suddenly everybody thinks कि यार बड़ा creative है यार, बड़े out of the box ideas सोचता है. Last 2 slides. These were 5 or 6 things which I read, which were a different tool for me to understand the world I live in. All of these are highly recommended. The top 2 are papers, the rest are books, so I can leave that with you. And in conclusion, we're entering a period of turbulence. Next 30 to 40 years are not going to be easy, and all of us are going to have to work in that space. Understanding the underlying maths and science helps us understand what's actually going on around us and helps us approach it in a different way. To be creative, i.e. to have ideas that have value, you have to have different inputs. You know garbage in, garbage out, right? Yeah. So different input in, different output out. If you can think about ways from a different facet, you have more chances of coming up with innovative ideas. And finally, don't fucking assume anything. Seriously. Because that is where people, but I thought, which happens now. Don't let that happen to you. Make sure you've got that very, very clear.
I broke up over assumption.
I guess we don't have time for questions, but
Alright, so guys, I'll quickly like to thank Keyur and his team at MPSTME for giving us this venue.
yeah.